Members, we are going to resume the second portion of our hearing this afternoon. And we've got Commissioner Harrington, who was kind enough to come in and visit with us. Thank you for coming in, Commissioner. Did you have any kind of a statement you want to make, or we were just intending?
I have an open comment if you'd like me to make it. So.
Go ahead, Commissioner, go ahead.
Senator Newman, members of the committee, thank you very much. For the record, my name is John Harrington. I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Public Safety. I want you to thank you for inviting me here today. And it does feel a little weird to actually be in the room with people. I've done so many team and Zoom meetings that not being in front of a screen does seem a little odd right now. I will tell you that the security of the Capitol complex is a responsibility of the Department of Public Safety. And it's a topic that's often under discussion because it wasn't really something I had ever had to deal with when I was Chief of Police at Metro Transit, Chief of Police at the Capital City. We assisted State Patrol, but we really never got much into the depths of how do you protect the Capitol complex itself. As a consequence, I've had lots of conversations with Colonel Langer, who I think is the absolute expert on the Capitol security complex. But I've also talked to Sven and Meyerson and many others, including many of you who have had concerns about how do we protect the Capitol, the legislative bodies that are here, and the millions of people that come to visit the Capitol every year. We are constantly looking for weaknesses in our security plan. And I will tell you that whether it is in staffing or technology or in information gathering or in facilities, we look at that on a regular basis. Sometimes we're successful in getting some additional resources for that. Sometimes we're not. And we make the best of what we have in either case. I'm very proud of the work that the troopers and the Capitol Security does, quite frankly, with the number of events that happen at the Capitol and the number of people that come through the Capitol, the numbers that Colonel Langer talked about today in terms of the very few cases of assault or damage, I think are really pretty outstanding for a complex that sees this many people. We do it with a community policing model, and that's a model I got trained in 1977 when I came on with the St. Paul Police Department. It's a model I've used both throughout my career there as chief of police there. It's a model that I've used with the ISEG, with the Rolling Stones riots, with the All-Star Game, with the Super Bowl, with the Republican National Convention. It's a model that has been not just talked about, but it's a model that I've seen work regularly. And it's a model that's vetted by the police forum, PERF, the COPS office, all talk about using a community policing model as the model that modern police departments should use. I was also trained in the old military model of the March and Tromp model back when I first came on the job, where you dragged your foot and you stuck the 36-inch wooden baton out in front of you as a way to get people to move. And I think somewhere after the LA riots, many police departments, including my own, realized that we needed a better set of tactics if we were going to really be successful. I have heard loud and clear from many of your constituents and from many of you that there's a belief that the State Patrol received an order or a direction from Governor Walz or Lieutenant Governor Flanagan to disregard the criminal behavior. And I can tell you that that's not true. It didn't come from me. It didn't come from them. There absolutely was no order given. There was a plan that Colonel Langer articulated, and he articulated it pretty well with it's an A or B, or an if A, then B. But the idea of going out and talking to the protesters first is basic community policing. It's what we've done from Black Lives Matter to Second Amendment rights groups to folks at the governor's residence and everybody in between. We start out trying to have a conversation first, and then when we find out we can't have a conversation, we move into a plan B where we have to enforce the law at that point. We did have a plan. And I recognize that that plan was not as successful as either Colonel Langer or I or any of you would have liked to have seen. Frankly, the statue came down, and I'll tell you, having watched the video, it came down way faster than I had any reason to believe that a statue could possibly come down. I was really expecting that in order for them to get a statue that size off of a pedestal, they were going to need a truck or a whole bunch of people, and that just tossing a rope around something and yanking was certainly not going to be. And that certainly impacted my vision of how quickly we could get people into position, because there wasn't a truck up on the roadway, and I didn't think that they could possibly do it with just the human beings that were there. That's a misjudgment on my part. It's a misjudgment I won't make again, and I know that it's a misjudgment that Colonel Langer won't make again in the future. I did approve the plan as a Plan A and a Plan B. And I welcome the opportunity today to discuss both that particular incident and the evolution of how should we be protecting the Capitol complex and protecting all of the folks that are in it. And I appreciate once again the opportunity to be here with you today. It is an opportunity to speak the facts and get some answers out on the table, so that we're not dealing with suppositions and questions, and we can simply answer the questions as directly as we possibly can.
Thank you, Commissioner. And that is precisely what I have in mind, is to just get answers to questions so we're dealing with facts. I think I'm going to start, though, Commissioner. I just want to have the committee members have a little bit better understanding of your background and your responsibilities. So I'm going to walk through a few preliminary questions with you before we get to the topic at hand. Could you give us a little idea as to your professional background?
Sure. I started in policing in 1977. Joined the St. Paul Police Academy July 11th of 1977. Went through their 26-week academy and then graduated and was assigned as a police officer. I spent, 6 years as a police officer, roughly, and made rank of sergeant. From sergeant, I spent about another 10 years in that grade. I ran the training unit for a number of years. I ran personnel for a number of years. I was a patrol sergeant, and I was a juvenile investigator running the school resource officer program for the St. Paul Police Department. I made lieutenant from there, running the training unit, and then from lieutenant I was assigned to the Western District, which is everything from basically Rice Street to the Minneapolis border, from Larpenteur down to the river. So it's the biggest district in the city of St. Paul. At that time, it had the highest crime rate in the city of St. Paul, and I was the district commander there when we were doing major dope operations, including Operation Red Rocket and Operation Sunrise and a few others there. From there, I was promoted to being chief of police in 2004. I stayed as chief of police from the period from 2004 to 2010. During that period, we initiated many programs, including the Blueprint for Safety, which was a state-sponsored program to reduce domestic violence. We did a Stop Armed Gang Assault program, which reduced gang shootings and homicides in the city for about a 2-year period to 0. And we were the host for the Republican National Convention in about 2008. That was probably the biggest event that I'd ever had to coordinate, because it involved bringing in about 2,500 to 3,000 police officers. It brought in the National Guard. It brought in multiple federal agencies. It was the first time I was literally in charge of a multi-agency coordinating center, where literally everything that happened in the Twin Cities flowed through the MAC. And we did have protests. We had anarchist activity. We had protests. We had fire bombings. We had federal arrests for arson. At the end of my tenure as St. Paul Police Chief, I left and I joined you for a period of about 1.5 years, where I served as a Minnesota State Senator for District 67, which is the East Side District of St. Paul, during the redistricting year. By 2012, I had heard the clarion call to go back into the service as a police officer, and I took over as the Chief of Police for the Metropolitan Transit Police. At that department, once again, we were actively involved in many of the protests, whether it was the Justice for Jamar in Minneapolis protests, many of the protests on the state freeway. The Metropolitan Transit Police became the arrest authority for many of those. I spent 6 years there, roughly. The last major event there was the Super Bowl for me, where I personally was in charge of making the arrest when we had a sleeping dragon contingent of anarchists who locked themselves across the railroad tracks along the light rail lines. And since all of the rest of my cops were all tied up with doing the Super Bowl stuff, I actually ended up being the actual field supervisor for organizing a mass arrest there. At the end of my tenure there, I was encouraged to look at coming back to the state, and I applied for the position as the Commissioner of Public Safety, and I was happy to be selected by Governor Walz and took over with him in January of 2019. Since I've been here, I have done some modifications to the Department of Public Safety, adding in a community affairs person and initiating the working group to reduce deadly force encounters, and additionally working on domestic violence as a continued interest there.
Commissioner, what are the duties and jurisdiction that fall within your purview as the Commissioner of Public Safety?
There are, Chair, there are about 14 different divisions that work under the Department of Public Safety. The one I usually see you across about is DVS, Department of Vehicle Services. There are 3 law enforcement components to under my purview. They include the Minnesota State Patrol, the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, and the Alcohol Gambling Enforcement Unit. So those 3 are the law enforcement section. They are commanded by an assistant commissioner who is Booker Hodges. I have an emergency services section, which is commanded by an assistant commissioner, Bruce West. They include ECN, which is the Emergency Communication Network. That's the 911 backbone there. The emergency management, so Homeland Security and Emergency Management, which Joe Kelly runs, which is currently involved in most of the COVID pieces. And then the State Fire Marshal and the State Pipeline Security is also part of that. And all of those have been actively involved. The third section is the section of really services, and that includes the Office of Justice Program, which is Kate Weeks. That's all of the victim services programs for the state of Minnesota, the Department of Vehicle Services, and the Traffic Safety Unit. So those are the big units, and then we have support units like financial services and HR and comms that all also report to the department.
You mentioned the State Patrol. Would it be correct that you would be Colonel Langer's immediate supervisor?
I would say that I am, by statute, the Commissioner of Public Safety appoints the colonel. There is an assistant commissioner who runs all the law enforcement services. That's Commissioner Hodges. But generally speaking, Colonel Langer and I have a direct report relationship where if something happens, whether it's a trooper that gets hurt or we have a major crash or there's a major investigation, I am always kept in the loop on those.
So it sounds like there's a assistant supervisor of some type that would stand between you and Colonel Langer. However, you would be his well, we'll call it, his supervisor within the Department of Public Safety.
Yes, that would be correct, sir.
The ultimate supervisor, correct?
That is correct, sir.
Okay. And thank you for that, Commissioner. I just wanted the members to understand what your professional background is, and it sounds like it's very extensive in addressing the topic of which is the hearing today. And that is capital security and the damage to capital property between May 26th and June 10th, 2020. So with those dates in mind, Commissioner, at some point on May 26th or thereafter, did you become aware of any specific threats to the Capitol? Now, Colonel Langer described a threat to burn the Capitol. Were you made aware of that threat or any other threat?
Yes, sir. I was made aware of threats to the Capitol as well as to other government buildings and facilities that were being described in social media posts and other intelligence briefings as being possible targets.
Were there, Colonel Langer wasn't sure, he did describe the one threat to burn the Capitol, and we'll hold off June 10th for right now, but were there other threats to the Capitol subsequent to May 26th and before June 10th, other than the threat that Colonel Langer described that you were aware of?
Mr. Chair, I would describe them not so much as threats as being made aware of large numbers of protesters or demonstrators who were coming to the Capitol, and in looking into the groups that were coming to the Capitol to protest, we recognized that in the names of some of them, there were groups that had staged occupations in other government facilities and who had attempted to do damage in other government facilities. And so while they were not necessarily characterized as a threat, we recognized them as being potential actors who, once we knew they were going to be on the Capitol grounds, we wanted to make sure that we had adequate security to prevent either an occupation or damage to the Capitol or damage to anybody that was coming to or from the Capitol.
During that week then, Commissioner, was this more or less, an ongoing concern of yours from May 26th on?
This was absolutely an ongoing concern, and it lasted substantially. It was one of the last assignments that we pulled people off of in terms of the scope of work that the state was involved in trying to reduce the civil unrest. We kept the Capitol complex as being one of those anchor points that we believed was absolutely essential because the symbolic value of having damaged or toppled the Capitol or occupied the Capitol, we felt would be unrecoverable.
What was your response to protect the Capitol?
I had initiated a conversation with Colonel Langer and asked him to begin pulling in additional state patrol into the Twin Cities area, which he did with more rapidity than I believe was possible. I was, in fact, concerned that we would not be able to get people here very rapidly given the geographic spread that troopers operate out of. So if I'm pulling somebody out of Cook, Minnesota, and I'm pulling them out of Worthington, and I want to get them here and I want them to be able to operate, it's not a matter of you snap your fingers and suddenly they appear. They got to drive here, they got to get staged, they got to get equipped, they got to get set up. So I was really very impressed with the colonel and his staff's ability to pull people in for that. I also did have a conversation with the adjutant general to ask whether there were resources from the National Guard if this tipped in a bad direction that he could mobilize. And we went through the process that requires for that request to go through the governor. And ultimately, we did bring in National Guard in the largest number that I believe has ever been mobilized during peacetime, and they were an integral part of the Capitol security plan. We also partnered with the St. Paul Police Department and the Ramsey County Sheriff's Department, and we also partnered with the DNR to bring in additional law enforcement resources in to protect the Capitol complex.
So you were satisfied, at least during the week of May 26th, that there were adequate resources deployed at the Capitol to prevent damage to the Capitol or the Capitol complex. Would that be fair?
That is fair.
When's the first time you had a conversation with General Jensen?
I believe it would have been Tuesday or Wednesday, and I'm going to have to look at my timeline to be certain of that.
Did you have multiple conversations with him during the course of that week?
Oh, absolutely. When we heard that there was going to be 75,000 people coming to Minneapolis on the Saturday for a rally, I was concerned whether there were sufficient resources between the city of Minneapolis, Hennepin County, and the State Patrol to be able to manage an event of that size and that scope. And so I mentioned that to him initially to say that was one of my concerns. And then once the governor had activated the Guard, we had multiple conversations literally every day as we figured out staging, deployment, and assignments and missions.
Were you aware of, well, I assume you were aware of the fence that went up around the Capitol? Was that fence put up at your suggestion or order, or was it the State Patrol that made that decision?
Mr. Chair, I believe that was the State Patrol's decision. It would certainly have been a decision I would have countenanced. It's the same decision that many of the that government agencies in the Twin Cities, in fact, did. St. Paul Police Department and the Ramsey County Sheriff's Law Enforcement Center had a similar fencing arrangement put up. Many of the precincts in Minneapolis had that same kind of fencing area put up. So it certainly would have been something that I would have been comfortable with, but I believe that never rose to my level of authority.
Excuse me, then on June 10th, There was an incident at the Capitol, which, of course, we've all talked about with the toppling of the statute. You did give a press conference, and I think it was on May 29th, I think, where you talked about well, I could be off on my date. I'm going to let you pick the date. But I remember seeing a press conference where you talked about the statue and the fact that it had become known that that was a specific threat. When's the first time that you knew or heard about a specific threat to property on the Capitol grounds?
I believe that was actually June 10th, and it was about 1:30 in the afternoon, or 13:30 hours. It was slightly before we went into a press conference with the governor that I was given a call by, I believe, either Colonel Langer or the BCA, who advised me that they had picked up a Facebook post describing an American Indian Movement group that was going to leave from Minneapolis at 5 p.m. to come and take down the Columbus statue.
And what was your response when you were given this information?
I believe I checked in with Colonel Langer and made sure that Colonel Langer was aware of the threat. He was. He told me that he had already had this conversation with the captain in charge. They described what their approach would be. I said that made sense to me. And then when I was asked that question during the press conference, I outlined what I understood the process would be, which is that we would have a State Patrol official go out and meet the protesters who would explain to them what the lawful process would be for removing statues or other entities or other objects off of the Capitol grounds, and that we were prepared to be there to try and not allow criminal behavior. So.
Other than speaking to Colonel Langer and he outlining his plan for this threat to the statute, did you do anything else in terms of preparation, or was it left in the hands of Colonel Langer and his troopers?
I was primarily left in the hands of Colonel Langer. At some point, my tribal liaison, Nigel Perot, was brought into this. I didn't directly ask for them to do that, but I was told shortly before they went out to meet with the protesters that Nigel was there with them, and I thought that made perfectly good sense. That's exactly why you have a tribal liaison, is someone who could go out and hopefully address the community and cultural concerns. So I was even more comfortable with their plan once I knew that Nigel was being brought in. Aside from that, there really wasn't any other conversation with State Patrol directly or with anybody other than Colonel Langer.
Prior to the statute being toppled, did you personally come to the Capitol complex, or were you away on some other duties?
We were at the Department of Revenue doing the press conference, as I recall. The governor and several other people were doing a press conference at the Department of Revenue, as I recall, that day.
So prior to the statute being pulled down, you were not personally on the Capitol complex?
No, sir, I was not.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Did you come to the Capitol complex after the statute was toppled?
No, sir, I did not.
Okay. All right. I think that with that, I am going to go to member questions. Chairman Limmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Afternoon, Commissioner. Good
Afternoon,
to see you.
Senator.
Only today did we receive information that 3 people are the subject of investigation, and their names have been given to the Ramsey County Prosecutor's Office regarding the incident on June 10th. And we haven't seen any investigation notes or reports, police reports of any kind. Do we have access to that at this time?
Commissioner.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Limmer, that's still an open criminal investigation, and so the reports would not be public as of yet. Once the charging decision by John Choi or his staff is made, then the reports largely will be There will be some of those reports that will be public data at that point, and then once the case is concluded, obviously, then the reports are all public at that time.
And then, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, so these individuals, the names that have been given in the investigative reports that have been given to the county prosecutor have not resulted in formal charges. Is that correct?
Commissioner Harrington.
Mr. Chair, Senator Limmer, to the best of my knowledge, we handed the packet of charging documents to the county attorney yesterday in the afternoon. I have not heard from the BCA that a charging decision has at this time been made.
When you say we, who are those parties that have submitted those?
Drew Evans, as the superintendent of the BCA, is who I've been in contact with to make sure that the case was continuing to move forward. I'm not sure of who the individual investigator who was leading the case was at this time.
And could
Senator
you tell me, thank you, Mr. Chairman, could you tell me what charges, what the formal accusation is?
Commissioner Harrington.
As I understand it, Mr. Chair and Senator Limmer, it would be a felony crime damage to property, but the charging decision is ultimately up to the county attorney. We present our slate of facts that we believe support a specific charge, but ultimately that decision rests with the county attorney.
Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With a value that has been talked about, the value of damage at $150,000 to the monument as well as the base, I certainly would imagine it would be a felony. It certainly steps way over the threshold for the dollar value on that type of damage. Are there, can you tell me if there are more than 3 persons that are subject to this investigation?
Commissioner Harrington.
Could there be other reports given to the county attorney promoting charges against any others?
Mr. Chair, Senator Limmer, yes, that is in fact partly why it took us a little longer than to simply charge immediately, is that we believe that this was, there was not just one person that was responsible. We had the leader who we had identified at the scene, who we interviewed right away, but we recognized that this was in fact potentially a conspiracy case where there were multiple people that were involved in the decision, both the mechanics and the decision to topple the statue. We were able to identify successfully the leader and 2 others. We believe that we have identified at least partially 2 more, and there may be others once we take them into custody and do interviews with them. But there is at least 2 other people that are persons of interest that the BCA is considering as they continue the investigation.
Senator Limmer.
And Commissioner, the individuals that have been recognized so far, are they formal members of the American Indian Movement, or are they apart from that organization?
Commissioner Harrington.
Mr. Chair, Senator Limmer, I cannot answer that question definitively, so
All
I
right.
just don't know the answer to that.
Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess one last question. Do you have any type of time factor of when the Ramsey County Prosecuting Office would make formal charges on these individuals?
Commissioner Harrington.
Mr. Chair, Senator Limmer, that's in the hands of another elected official. I would not be prepared to guess at what the timeline for John Choi would be. I have not known him to delay prosecutory decisions. If we have all our case facts in order, and we have a long history of working with the Ramsey County Attorney, so I think the BCA has the kind of background knowledge to make sure that when we present a case, we present good, solid, complete cases. But I don't have a timeline that I can give you.
I would imagine
Senator Limmer.
if Mr. Choi would be listening, I would hope that he could give us investigative reports as soon as they're possible to be given to this committee membership.
I'm happy to make that inquiry on your behalf, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Yazinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, for coming in today. You were here for the previous questions with Colonel Langer, and I'm going to do kind of the same thing because I want to get the facts straight here. So according to the DPS timeline that I have, that's your timeline, you knew about the event to destroy Capitol property by 11:28 a.m. Is that correct?
Commissioner Harrington.
Mr. Chair, Senator Jasinski, I didn't personally know about it at 11:28, but I believe the St. Paul Police Department was aware of it, and they notified the BCA or the State Patrol at that time. I didn't get not notified of it, probably for at least another hour or so.
Another hour after
Senator
that.
Yazinski.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So according, again, to the DPS timeline, the troopers were at the Capitol complex for 38 minutes before the rioters arrived and 1 hour and 19 minutes before the Capitol property was destroyed. Is that correct?
Commissioner Harrington.
Mr. Chair, Senator Jasinski, that sounds correct according to the timeline.
Senator Yazinski.
Thank you. So in your comments, your beginning comments, you have a lot of experience in these types of things, and I was very impressed with your experience in that. So about the same time frame in the Memorial Day weekend, the Faribault Police Department was notified that they may have a incident at the police station as well, and our chief of police within about 5 hours had barricades put out front, did pretty much an all call, as the fire department would call it, and brought all the officers in and stationed about 5 to 6 officers out front of the police station, and is what my police chief quoted, you want as many eyes on the scene as possible to see what was going on. And additionally, he called in 30 officers in what they call turtle suits that were directly behind the entrance of the police department in case something did arise to that, so that they could immediately react. Had barricades out, had as many eyes on the scenes out front, and then had backup. And it's kind of similar to what happened here, but my concern is with your experience, one officer to go out to do that versus, police station in Faribault, 5 officers out there. I would think that the common sense would have as many eyes on the scene as possible. So, for instance, if you had 4 or 5 people that were going to start trying to tear down a statue, you could track those people versus one person's eyes watching. So, I guess I'm disappointed, to be honest, and I think my constituents in my district and people across Minnesota are disappointed in what happened that day. And to have only one officer to go out there knowing 4 hours in advance. The news stations were there. I think there was multiple news stations. There was people out there. And we send one person out there to do that. I'm disappointed. My constituents are disappointed. I believe, and in the future, if there's a threat like this, we should have more than one set of eyes on the scene so that we could make multiple arrests of seeing who was involved, who threw the rope, who climbed up, who yanked on it, all those things. And to have one officer out there is very, very disappointing to me. And I would hope that we could hear or learn from our future that we could have more response to something like this, which we knew was a credible threat. I mean, it was Facebook, it was news channels that were there, everybody was watching, and we send one officer out there. I'm sorry, but I'm just disappointed in what happened that day. Thank you.
I don't hear a question. I will go to the next senator, Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, for coming today. I appreciate that very much. Senator Jasinski was talking about his district, and I'd just like to talk a little bit about mine. And I think the frustration really wells up under this when we've established that this is a well-known event that was coming. It just, to me, it seems like a softball where we're coming, our intent is to do criminal damage to the Capitol complex, come and stop us. It seems very laid out, so to me, it's very curious how this whole process worked. And that's why we really want to get to the nub of what's going on. Let's get to the answer. Let's get to the facts. So I've got a series of questions here regarding the general order that was handed out. I think most of us have it, correct? We all have that?
Senator Johnson, that document is in the possession of the members.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I don't know if Commissioner Harrington has. He has just shown me that he does have a copy of the document. Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to go through a few of the items here, we understand that the general order for frontline troops or troopers is kind of the guiding principle for how they interact with these situations. This one in particular, 25-014, is a general order that talks about First Amendment assemblies. So, Mr. Commissioner, under Part A, State Patrol is not to unreasonably interfere with those engaged in the lawful exercise of their First Amendment right. do you believe that committing a felony-level crime against capital property is somebody's First Amendment right?
Commissioner Harrington.
Mr. Chair, Senator Johnson, no, I do not.
Senator Johnson.
Thank you. We'll continue down to the guidelines principles. That's same area, section 2, paragraph C. Here it says that State Patrol's duty is to preserve peace, protect public safety, provide traffic safety, and here's the part that it really we're talking about today: prevent the destruction of property. Do you believe the State Patrol properly followed the guiding principles, including the prevention of destruction of property, regarding the event that happened on June 10th?
Commissioner Harrington.
Mr. Chair, Senator Johnson, I believe the State Patrol acted in the spirit of that order in trying to keep the peace, in not having innocent civilians or others unnecessarily injured, and in preventing further destruction at the state capitol, which we were also fearful of occurring. We were concerned that if we mobilized in a certain way, would that in fact prompt a larger group to then descend on the Capitol to take further action. And so part of the thought process was, well, how do we handle this in a way that will keep the peace and minimize the amount of destruction to property that we can? And once the statue was toppled, the decision was then to say, can we go ahead and do an investigation and hold people accountable for the destruction of property without necessarily provoking a response that might be more damaging to life and or property in the Capitol complex?
Senator Johnson.
Mr. Chair, thank you for that. And I understand that, but I know you were sitting here earlier, but I'd like your perspective on that. Why wasn't, if we understand that this would be a criminal level, and maybe at the time we didn't realize it was going to be a first-degree offense, over $10,000 worth of damage, but we did understand there was children involved in that. Why didn't we stop that offense against property of our citizens across the state? Why didn't we stop that before it became a felony level where we need to start worrying about safety, or we need to start worrying about arresting people?
Commissioner Harrington.
Mr. Chair, Senator Johnson, I don't disagree with you that I think from a tactical perspective, if we had to do this all over again, we may have made different tactical decisions. Given the climate that we were operating under and the information we had at the time, we felt that we were acting in good faith by getting out there literally a half an hour earlier than we even thought they were leaving from Minneapolis. We didn't expect the crowd to be there as quickly, and we didn't expect the statue to go over nearly as quickly as it did. I think if we'd known several different factors, if we'd known they were all going to be there a half an hour earlier, I think that might have changed the dynamics of how many people we had ready and when we needed to have them ready. If we'd known the statue was going to be that easy to topple, that might also have changed the dynamics of how we felt like we had to protect the statue. Given what we knew at the time, I think we made, Captain made good tactical decisions at the time, and I support his tactical decisions. I generally don't like to second-guess field commanders because I wasn't there, and I wasn't sitting there in front of them. I wasn't having to gauge the volatility of the crowd or what else might have happened. And the captain's got a lot of years of experience in protecting this Capitol, and so I felt like it was important to, we left it in his hands. I feel like that was the right decision. And if you were asking me, if tomorrow somebody said they're going to take down the Humphrey statue, would we do it exactly the same way? I'd still want to use a community policing approach, but I would probably do some other things to backstop that right now.
Senator Johnson.
Just a couple more questions on here. I'd like to get back to the general order. Underneath the First Amendment assemblies, there's a section here. I believe that's section 4. It bifurcates between pre-planned events and spontaneous events. Would you consider this a pre-planned event?
Commissioner Harrington.
Chairman Newman, Senator Johnson, yes, I do believe this was a pre-planned event.
Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as you've mentioned before, there was two different plans, a plan A and a plan B, and maybe it wasn't, maybe they were more joined rather than separate plans, but So you said that you approved those plans then. So what was your input into the plans that came forward?
Commissioner Harrington.
Chairman Newman, Senator Johnson, I was told that we were going to engage them with verbal de-escalation and to talk to them first. That was the initial step, which is consistent with the community policing approach to dealing with civil unrest. You go out, and the first thing you want to do is trying to talk to people and talk them out of doing criminal behavior, because if that happens, if nobody goes to jail, the criminal behavior doesn't happen. When that did not work, Plan B was what was going to happen if Plan A didn't work. So it was more of an if-then scenario. If Plan A works, the troopers stay in the Capitol and we all go home. If Plan A doesn't work, the troopers come out. And in the theory that the statue is not going to tip over that easily, we put 20, 30 troopers around it. We protect the statue. We push the crowd back. And then the statue, once again, doesn't go over. That would be the plan that as I understood it. The timing of how quick it would take to get the troopers from the Capitol complex to where the statue was, in part based on my understanding that we were looking at something that was supposed to start in Minneapolis at 5 and then come to St. Paul after that. The timing of having them in the Capitol at 4:30 seemed like we had plenty enough time for being able to get people mobilized and pre-positioned. As it turned out, our timing didn't work because their schedule, despite the fact that they posted it on a Facebook post, wasn't accurate. Excuse me. I have been tested for COVID in the last 2 days, and I've come back negative, so the coughing is simply a sore throat that has nothing to do with any diseases. For those, you're far enough away, though, I think you're all safe. Because I see several of you backing away from the dais at this point. So.
I believe, though, Commissioner, that Colonel Langer did indicate that there was, I think he said 35 troopers at the Capitol, or within the Capitol complex, prior to the statute actually coming down, and perhaps a half an hour before. Does that jive with your recollection?
My recollection that was what I was told before the statute came down was that there was going to be about 25 troopers there. That he got another 10 in, I think, is once again testimony to Colonel Langer's ability to move people around rapidly when he needs to. He has been just really amazing at getting bodies from point A to point B and pulling folks off of traffic details and other administrative duties to get them into where they need it most. So it's consistent with what I know happened after the fact, but it wasn't what I believed we were going to be mobilizing when we were briefed initially.
Mr. Chair, at that point.
Johnson, I interrupted.
Mr. Chair, at that point.
Senator Yazinski.
So in previous testimony, I was writing down notes from Colonel Langer, and I have 35 troopers circled on my page. So I believe the number was 35 that were in the Capitol at the time, not 25. So I have a comment after that, but I'm going to go Senator Johnson.
Senator Johnson, we interrupted you. I apologize.
Oh, anything for the chair, so we're good. But we continue to hear this line where there wasn't time to get the troops ready, yet we had cameras lined up. We had people out there watching that knew about this in advance, and yet our own DPS wasn't able to prepare, apparently, the troops necessary to protect the statue, the public property, the property of Minnesotans out there. This is just kind of an open net goal, it seems like, for the rioters, kind of an invitation to take a shot at that. I guess with that, I really don't have any further questions. I'm still slightly confused on why we didn't have those 35 troopers there to protect when we had this amount of warning, but I'll leave that up for
Senator
other
Johnson, is that a
questions.
question to the commissioner or not?
No, just more of a statement. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Yazinski, I don't know if you had another point, a question on point, but you are not next on the list.
Okay, thank you. I'll wait.
Senator Howe.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Harrington, for coming in and answering some questions for us and enlightening us on what happened during that period of time. As you became the commissioner, or maybe in your previous positions, because you got a wide history in law enforcement, Did you ever receive a briefing from the National Guard on their capabilities or how they, or the process of deploying them or activating them?
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, Senator Hall, absolutely. I have had several conversations between General Nash and General Jensen and General Kelly about what the capabilities of the National Guard are and what the steps it takes to bring them into a theater of activity.
I appreciate that. And that, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that answer, Commissioner, because I think it's very important for folks to understand there is a process and there is a limit to their capabilities and how to, and it's important for those of us at this level to know how to employ them. You know, I've got to go back to one of the things that Colonel Langer said and what you stated just earlier and for Senator Johnson's answer. It seemed like the more volatile and angry the crowd or the rioters or the protesters are, the less likely it is that they're going to get arrested because they don't want to make them angry, or is that what I'm hearing?
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, Senator Hall, no, I would say that it depends on criminal intent and what we believe the criminal intent is. And that's more of the determining factor. We're used to having crowds that are irate and vocal and jumping up and down and yelling and saying things that many people wouldn't appreciate hearing. That's a normal part of being at the Capitol, where First Amendment protests are not just sanctioned but lauded. So I don't think it's a matter of whether they're angry. It's a matter of whether we believe they're going to commit further criminal activity or harm people, and that typically makes the decision for us. Unless there are other outside orders given. And so, for example, on protests where when we had the curfew in place, we simply made it a general announcement that if you were out after the curfew, we were going to arrest people out after the curfew. And that order was given to all the troopers, and the troopers followed that order because that was the order of the day. Typically, though, you monitor the crowd and you try and get a sense of whether this crowd will simply disperse on its own, or whether you're going to need to make arrests. Oftentimes, and I will use my example from the Super Bowl, the first thing I did when we arrived at the Sleeping Dragon contingent across the tracks was to engage with their leadership to find out, did I need to have a cut team come in and cut them apart, or what did I need to do in order to get them off of the tracks? It took us probably a half an hour to talk about that. During that time frame, my officers stood by in a arrest bus waiting for further instructions. Once we had determined that this group, 10 of that group wanted to be arrested for civil disobedience, we proceeded to move them onto the arrest bus and proceed with the arrest. Those who wanted to disperse at that point, we allowed them to leave because they were no longer going to create a public nuisance. That was a tactical decision that I made at the scene based on, well, they were not going to continue the criminal activity. They were not going to hurt anybody else. So we did make arrests for those that we thought needed to be arrested, and we allowed others who had said, I do not wish to be arrested and I don't want to be part of this protest anymore, to let them go. So it was a tactical decision that I think you make at the scene.
Senator Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Commissioner, thanks for that answer. I guess I'm questioning why that same approach wouldn't have worked here. I guess arresting those folks that admitted that they were willing to get arrested and then disperse those folks that didn't. And I know we're going back to second guess the tactical commander on the ground, and I'm not going to do that. It'd be great to have him here to be able to ask those questions because he was the man making those decisions. You're in charge of the BCA or you oversee the BCA. Can you tell us, you know, I'm disappointed a month, because I've done a number of arson investigations and that type of thing, and I know sometimes it takes a while to build that evidence train, but it's been almost a month. We heard today that they've processed 3 for possible charges. Can you tell us how many investigators at the BCA are actually working this investigation?
Commissioner Harrington.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Howe, I don't know the total number that are assigned to the investigation. I can certainly find that out. I do know from the conversations with Superintendent Drew Evans that there was a choice made at the early part of the investigation. Do we simply want the leader who we had already identified and who had already admitted to this and to just charge him? Or do we want to go for the broader conspiracy case and try and charge more people? We made the decision that we thought it was more appropriate to charge more people. We were able to get the next two people identified fairly rapidly, and then we stalled, frankly, getting the next few people, and because in part that's going to require folks that were involved in the conspiracy to testify, or us to get more background information off of Facebook or off of other digital sources. So that's part of the delay, was the decision as to whether it made sense to try and get all 5 or all 7 or whatever it is at one time and charge all of them at the same time, or to simply go for what you had in hand. Ultimately, as it began to lag, we said it doesn't, unless you're really certain that you're going to be able to make these arrests in the next couple of days, it made more sense to just go ahead and process what we have, make sure that John Choi knew that there may be subsequent charges to follow if we continue to build our case, but that it made more sense to not let this lag any further.
But Commissioner, the two tactics wouldn't be mutually exclusive. You could have arrested the folks that you observed, not you personally, but law enforcement observed damaging, criminal damage to property, and still investigated charging others in the future. Would that not be true?
Mr. Chair, that is correct.
My apologies, Senator Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Commissioner, I guess I've got a question. You brought up the fact that you were surprised, and I think many people were, that how fast that statue came down and how poorly it was secured. Has anyone made any request to have the rest of these statues and their security looked at to make sure that they are properly fastened or securely fastened to their bases?
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, Senator, I have not asked that question. I have asked my staff to scour the internet to see if any other statues are being mentioned on the internet as being targeted, and so we have been regularly looking to make sure if any other statues or other parts of the Capitol complex are being mentioned in internet posts as potential targets, but I have not checked into the structural integrity of the statues themselves.
Senator Howe.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Commissioner, I will just say that, that one was been up since 1931, and I'm sure the standards of yesterday in that era is different than today, but I would suggest that that request be done, and we make sure that it takes a little more effort than a couple of ropes and a couple of people yanking on them to topple our Capitol property. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Senator Senjum, you have a question to that point?
Yes, to a point, and just following up on the whole idea of identifying people associated with the statue. Commissioner, I'm pretty sure, although I don't know for sure, that there are a lot of cameras around this place that can pretty easily identify car license plates, no matter what street they might be on around the Capitol complex. Many of these people, of course, left, and they did probably go to their cars. Has any work been done along those lines in terms of, that you know of at least, with respect to checking car license plates relative to people leaving the scene that day?
Commissioner Harrington.
Mr. Chair, Senator Senjum, I'm not aware of whether we've run anything for car license plates. I know the BCA has done an extensive digital look at the video that we were able to capture, whether it was on Capitol security cameras or off of the general media cameras or the other social media cameras that captured the event. And it's been primarily focused on trying to identify the people. I can check with the BCA to see if they have looked at that as an investigative lead or not, but I'm not aware that they have.
Senator Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Harrington, good to see you. Commissioner, earlier in your testimony, you talked about capital threat groups. I'm paraphrasing probably that. You talked about aggressive actors. Is that what you called them?
Yes, sir.
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, could you tell me, is Black Lives Matter, would they be considered an aggressive actor coming to the Capitol here?
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, Senator Hall, I would not characterize them as an aggressive actor. Don't have a criminal history on them for actually committing damage to property. They have been very vocal. They've done some obstruction of traffic, but I have not seen any indications that they have been involved with criminal behavior.
Senator
Thank
Hall.
you. And Commissioner, and thank you, Mr. Chair, I'm going to go to June 19th. If you remember, Black Lives Matter was walking around at least the front of the Capitol initially, and then they came to the University Avenue, and I think that's Park Street on that side. And they were shutting down traffic. Is that aggressive behavior?
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, Senator Hall, I would argue, yes, that is aggressive behavior. It has been, under different administrations, viewed differently. I've had mayors and other elected officials have said people want to block traffic as part of their First Amendment rights, as long as you can move traffic safely around them and they're not blocking emergency vehicles. Let that go. I've had other municipalities where they feel that that's much more of an activity. The one place that we absolutely do not allow it is on the state freeways, where people come onto the freeway. So blocking traffic on the freeway we treat differently than we do, say, University Avenue or Park Avenue typically.
Senator Hall.
And thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner, is it against the law to block traffic on a city street?
Commissioner.
Senator Newman, Senator Hall, yes, it is. It would be illegal pedestrian movement. So it's essentially jaywalking, for want of a better description.
And Mr. Chair and Commissioner, no one was arrested that day, and yet they blocked the street for probably, I was viewing it from outside and from my office window, maybe a half hour or something like that, but why was no one arrested?
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, Senator Hall, I don't really have a very concrete answer to that. I know that St. Paul had blocked off traffic at one end of the street so that they weren't worried about it being a safety hazard. We had state troopers organized around there. There was at one point a decision as to whether or not we were going to move in and make arrests, and about the time that we had concluded that did make some sense, the crowd dispersed on its own, and so there was no longer a reason to make the arrest.
Okay.
Senator Hall, what time frame are you talking about at this point? Are you talking about a time frame outside of June 10th?
Yes, June 19th.
Yeah. The time frame that I had indicated to the committee members is very clearly May 26th through June 10th. I would ask you to keep that in mind.
Okay. I have one other question relating to the 19th that
Yeah, I would request that you stay within June 10th, please.
Okay. I have no other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator.
One moment.
Okay.
Excuse me, next on the list is Senator Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think we've had a pretty good description from Colonel Langer and from yourself as to what has happened. I guess the question I have there been discussions, or are there going to be discussions to analyze what happened and analyze what the reactions were, how we dealt with it, to make changes if something like this is going to happen again, in case, like you said, you already are watching to see if something else is going to be a target. Have you considered that maybe the 25 or 35 other troopers should be much closer to the scene while we're engaging? Have those discussions happened, or are they going to happen?
Commissioner Harrington.
Mr. Chair, Senator Murray, absolutely. A typical component of any major event, and I would argue that the toppling of a statue on the Capitol grounds, which had never happened before, is a major event, deserves an after-action report. And so my expectation is that Colonel Langer will convene with his captains to do their own after-action report on that. In addition to that, the Department of Public Safety is engaged in a broader after-action report internally to to the circumstances that happened from May 26th on. So we are looking at the issues around civil disturbance to try and make sure that our responses made sense and were appropriate. We have had and do have regular conversations about our staffing and our security models for different events. Without giving any technical details about how we staff, on the days where you are in session, you could expect to see a significantly higher level of trooper activity in and around the Capitol than on days when you're not in session. And on days when there are protests here, we ramp up our visibility. If we know specifically where they're likely to go, we can use, whether it's barricades, squad cars, or simply the troopers themselves to make sure that people stay within certain areas, and we can lock down the Capitol if push comes to shove to make sure that we don't have things happen inside the Capitol if we believe there's a serious threat there. So that is an ongoing conversation that happens between the Sergeant at Arms, the House, Captain Roski, Colonel Langer, and myself. And in some cases, when we believe we need to have even more resources, I call up Chief Todd Axel from the St. Paul Police Department or Sheriff Robert Fletcher from the Ramsey County Sheriff if I don't believe I can pull in enough bodies to be able to do it on our own. And we have a very robust relationship with them to supplement each other and to backstop each other. So absolutely, that conversation needs to continue and will continue because the threats at the Capitol evolve. We're in a very different climate right now than we were a year ago, and I expect in 6 months we may be in a different environment yet again. For example, we're tracking the concerns about when the George Floyd murder trial will start. We believe that may well be a tipping point for more civil unrest. Every time there's been a court hearing, we have geared up to make sure that if that becomes a new flashpoint, that we have resources already on site to be able to start our reaction more rapidly than we would have normally.
Senator Eric.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess I understand a lot of the specific details probably would not be able to be shared with the committee, but if we could get a kind of a general analysis of after those reports have been done, I think that would be appreciated, again, because if we're going to be asked to look at some legislation, I think it would definitely help us to get some general ideas of what you guys have come up with after analyzing this. So thank you.
Mr. Harrington.
Mr. Chair, Rick, we were absolutely happy to share those reports. We'd prefer to share them in an in-camera hearing setting rather than a public hearing setting, just because we would prefer folks that might want to do damage to the Capitol or do harm to others at the Capitol not know what our deployment is.
Senator Lang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, Commissioner Harrington, it's kind of been a long day. I appreciate your willingness to sit here and listen to us and some of the answers you've been providing us, and I appreciate, I know Colonel Langer has probably left the building, and I had some questions that I've been contemplating as he's been sitting here and you've been sitting here, and some of which have been asked by other individuals, and some of which I think really need to be addressed. And I think part of this is it is bigger than just the statute that we're talking about. I know that's not the only focal point. I know that the events of the 26th or the 10th are kind of weighing on all of us here at the Senate. We've kind of beat around the bush a little bit on things that should have changed. Colonel Langer mentioned things what he would be doing differently. I think he said the next time there was an incident, he would be doing things differently. You mentioned a couple different ways of saying that, the assessment of the toppling of the stanch, it's unrecoverable was the word you used. And I guess I'm going to give you the opportunity, and I kind of want a specific answer on this one, but I'm going to give you the opportunity to go beyond what the group of individuals between you and the Department of Public Safety and the State Patrol and the meetings that are going to happen in the upcoming months. What would you have done differently? What would you have done differently, hindsight being 20/20, things being perfect clarity on the statue, or let's just forget the statue, say anything on the Capitol complex over that time frame, what would you have done differently?
Commissioner Harrington.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Lang, as I think back to that time, I would have liked to have had, to begin with, better information and better intel about the group that was coming. That oftentimes colors the decision that we make, so that if we know that we have a group that has had anarchist activity in the past, you change your tactics because of that. I really did not have a lot of information about AIM as a active protest group, other than AIM Patrol that did patrol in the Little Earth community in Minneapolis. And so as I didn't have a lot of information about AIM recently, and there's some long history with AIM, I won't dispute that, but the recent history with AIM had not been one where they had been actively engaged in protest or violent protest or criminal damage to property. So one thing that would have been useful is we had a little bit more intel as to what we were facing. Based on the intel, I would currently think that we would have probably sent more than just Captain Roski out to meet with them. I don't know that I would have circled that, put 35 troopers out there, because I think that the look of 35 troopers in riot gear is provocative and may well precipitate activity that wasn't in anybody else's mind. And that's, frankly, the history of protest in the United States, is that oftentimes the presence of riot control in riot gear or in military gear tends to spark a demonstration to become more violent than simply going out there in softer uniform and trying to have a conversation. So I would probably have, I might have changed the numbers, but I don't think I would have changed the approach. I still think the soft approach was the right approach. When we did the RNC, the first day of the RNC, all of my officers from St. Paul were in soft uniforms. We had, similar to this, we had people in turtle suits staged behind the scenes ready to go. Another tactic that I think would be useful for the State Patrol on the Capitol complex that we haven't really done anything with yet is a bike response team. I've had a great deal of success with bike response teams. They are more mobile. The bikes become an additional barrier, but you're still operating in a less than militarized mode when you ride up to a group and set up your perimeter there. So the creation of a bike response team for the State Patrol and for the Capitol group might well be something that we should look at in the future, especially as we're having so many groups come to visit the Capitol and trying to get to all of the places and trying to provide that barrier. Trying to move fencing, Jersey barricade, or bike rack into an area to protect something requires much more than a couple of hours, oftentimes is not, to get the materials there. And so one of the things we did during the RNC is we used the bike patrol folks to ride into an area that we wanted to cordon off. They basically locked the bikes together, and that became your fence. So I think that would be one of the things that I might look at in the future. That is not an operation that we have currently tried to do with the State Patrol, so it would be a new operation. It would require us to change some training and to try and do some different things. But I think it's worthwhile at least looking at this point.
Senator Lang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You mentioned that a statue has never been toppled on the Capitol grounds. Has there been incidents where damage to property has happened in the past?
Currently.
And can you give us some examples?
Commissioner Harrington.
That's okay. I think you might have promoted me on that one, but that's okay. Mr. Chairman, Colonel Lang, there has been graffiti. We've had crim damage to property where people putting spray painting things on walls. We've had things attached to walls. We've had people trying to deface it in other ways. I believe we've had some windows broken, but I don't think we've ever had a statue toppled in this way at all.
Okay. Has there been anything changed? Thank you, Mr. Chair. Standard operating procedure between what the State Patrol, I think Colonel Langer was talking about, changes that might be coming to the way that both your law enforcement agency and the one he represents, the State Patrol. What are some of those ideas that are being changed?
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, Senator Lang, we have been looking at additional video surveillance as a mechanism for us to have more eyes on and better ideas of what's going on in the Capitol. We have discussed increasing the number of folks that are a part of the Capitol Security Force so that we'd have more people that are regularly on campus who can be stationed at different locations. I think those are the two that I know that we have had current conversations about that we looked at in terms of initiatives that would be part of the Capitol Security Complex.
Senator Lang.
And then, Commissioner, you mentioned the coordination that your department has between the National Guard and the governor's office. I believe it's an ongoing, normal, standard operation procedure on that aspect too, as far as how you talk to the governor's office, how the governor's office talks to the National Guard. Can you elaborate a little bit on that and tell me, you mentioned it was either, I have it written down here, either Tuesday or Wednesday that you talked to General Jensen. Can you tell us what exactly his advice to the governor's staff or yourself was, either Tuesday or Wednesday?
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, Senator Lang, I can't tell you what General Jensen advised. I regularly see General Jensen because he's also part of the cabinet. So we have a collegial relationship as I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Public Safety. He's essentially the Commissioner of the Department of Military Affairs. And so we have regular conversations in that venue. Typically, in the case of a civil unrest, and I'm not sure that typical is ever the right word for civil unrest, but on those occasions where we've had civil unrest, to the extent that the National Guard has been part of the conversation, there has to be an order by the governor to activate the Guard. And there is a process for local municipalities. Typically, it's the county sheriff or the county emergency manager who will call for the Guard. And those are typically for floods and tornado damage and things along that lines. In this case, during the civil disturbances, we did have some requests that came up through emergency manager to the sheriff, to the Guard to provide support for, I believe, Bemidji and some other places beyond the Twin Cities. So typically, I don't have tactical conversations with General Jensen. We are more talking about resources, training, the use of Camp Ripley, resources they have. We've had obviously a much more robust conversation because the National Guard has been activated as part of the COVID response. And as a consequence, I have National Guard folks in my State Emergency Operations Center on a daily basis, and therefore we have regular conversations. But it's primarily been around COVID rather than around civil disturbance.
So in relation to the civil disturbance, you would say typically that relationship between General Jensen is almost directly to the governor?
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, Senator Lang, initially it is directly from the governor to General Jensen. And then once the governor has activated the Guard, General Jensen and I talked on a regular basis as essentially we established a unified command of the National Guard and the state assets were going to work together to try and stop the civil unrest. So once the Guard was activated, we had a direct conversation on a regular basis. Prior to that, the conversation is bifurcated.
And just one more thing, Mr. Chair. Colonel Langer mentioned a couple of times while he was sitting in the chair you're sitting in that we're not perfect people. And I think that the group sitting around the table in front of you today would surely admit to not being perfect people. But I can tell you right now that this group isn't expecting perfection from you, from Colonel Langer, the State Patrol. We're expecting effectiveness. That's all we wanted. When it comes to the Capitol complex, we have thousands of people that work here every day that depend on the public safety, to depend on the Department of Public Safety to protect them. Not only a silly statute that is just, realistically, is just a representation of a person, but we're talking about living individuals that work here every day. I think you hit on an important topic when you started talking about these murder cases. I think you've seen a serious lack of leadership both on the city leading up to the dates of the 26th or the 10th. And sitting here as a state senator, I've been embarrassed by the response, and I think it all culminated by a statue on the Capitol grounds that was toppled. And we didn't see the State Patrol act in a way that most Minnesotans would expect them to act. They made no arrests. They made no attempt to stop it. And I think it has a lot less to do with the statue than it does with the response. I'm concerned about what the response is going to be when these murder trials start happening. I'm very concerned. I hope, and I expect a lot out of your department. I expect a lot of the State Patrol in the upcoming months. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll
Senator Dietzick, did you raise your hand to that point, or did you want to get on the list?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It was to that point, but I think he clarified because Senator Lang started talking murder, and so I was confused about what murder, because you made it sound to me, you talked about murders in Minneapolis, and so I wasn't sure which one, and then you came back to the trials, and I agree with you that I am concerned on just the civil unrest during, and whatever happens with the trial with the officers regarding Mr. George Floyd's murder. So I think you clarified when you answered, when you kept talking, so thank you.
Thank you, Senator, and we are getting off target or off topic at this point, so we're going to try and get back on. Senator Franzen, to that point.
To that point, Mr. Chair and Senator Lang, I've also been disturbed about the response because we're again, focused so much on this particular incident where the response we should have as a legislature is for the fundamental issue that we're facing as a state, as a country. And I keep referring back to that. I feel like we're tone deaf, and I'm actually getting really upset that we keep talking about something that's really not the core issue. The response that we should be having as a state senate is to have hearings about the core issue, about the murder, the killing, the lack of response of what we're supposed to be doing. We should be having hearings on packages of police response and de-escalation, and we should be having hearings on the bills that we presented and we introduced about public safety. And our response has been, I've been here since 10 o'clock this morning, and it's almost 2:30. We've talked about a very important issue is Capitol safety, and we should all be concerned about this. But I'm concerned that we're going to talk and have a response about hardening the Capitol grounds from now until eternity and what that's going to look, because that's not de-escalation. I don't think that's what Minnesotans want. We don't have metal detectors. We don't have, hard police everywhere. We know the officers that are here. We know the troopers that are here. We talk to them every day when we come into the chamber, and we respect them. But if we're going to be second-guessing them, what kind of message are we sending to Minnesotans that we're not trusting law enforcement? So I'm hearing double parallels. Like for one point, we trust police, and the other side, we don't. What message are we sending Minnesotans? Are we with our public safety? Are we going to trust their judgment and their leadership? Because Minnesota is desperate for leadership, and I don't see it right now. I honestly don't. I don't, and I hear you, Senator Ingebrigtsen, because I've heard you before. Every time I speak, you have to have a comment or have a smirk, but I'm tired of that. I think what we need to do is to really tackle the issues, gentlemen, because it's a lot of gentlemen here and a few women. Mothers are tired of seeing their kids die at the hands of police or the hands of crime or the hands of bad actors. Not everyone that came to that toppling of that statue was a rioter. There were children there. So let's tone it down. Maybe my tone is a little higher because I'm a little, passionate about this issue. I get used passion a lot, labeled on a lot, but I'll own it. Not everyone's a rioter. People protest. People challenge authority. That's not illegal. They do. We do. We're in a free country, and I think
Senator Franzen,
Senator Newman, I'm not done.
I know you're not, and I'm going to interrupt for a moment. Senator Franzen, you asked to be recognized to address a point, and you are severely off that point at this point. So if you have a statement to make that is on point, exactly what Senator Dietzick was talking about, please proceed.
I'll wrap it up, Senator Newman.
Thank you.
So my response to Senator Lang's comments about the response we haven't seen about our police and safety, I would start by, again, I'm going to protest another video. We started another committee hearing with a video. We never do that. People know what happened, and then we question what we heard on the video. So I object to having videos before we start a hearing. That's on the record. The response that we're calling people rioters, well, they're people who protest, and there's a way to do that. with civil disobedience. I've done it before. I never got arrested. I did it peacefully. And then the response that we're looking into hardening the Capitol or alluding to that, I just have real concerns of where we're leading with this committee hearing, honestly, Senator Newman, because we've been all over the board and we've spent hours, endless hours. And I'll just finish by acknowledging news that came up that's relevant to this discussion today, that the U.S. Attorney for Minnesota is convening a task force on surging Twin Cities violence, and I would say state violence. This is serious that we are having an escalation of violence in our state. So how are we going to tackle that? What is going to be our response?
Senator Franzen, I thought you were going to wrap up.
That's my final comment. Thank you.
Thank you. And the only response I would have is that it is perfectly appropriate for the Minnesota Senate to inquire into the actions of the troopers and the Commissioner of Public Safety and the National Guard, and that is what we are doing. I also think it's absolutely appropriate if we have discussions on the topic, Senator Franzen, that you want to talk about. The problem we really have here is I don't have jurisdiction over that. I have jurisdiction over the issue that is being discussed here. And I'm doing my best to keep people on topic. And I appreciate the fact that you wrapped it up. But I do think that it's appropriate to ask the Commissioner of Public Safety to come in and answer our questions as to what happened during, you can call it civil disobedience, you can call it rioting, you can call it protesting, but the bottom line here is that Capitol security is a serious issue. And damaging $150-some thousand worth of public property as a result of a riot or a protest or a demonstration, however you want to call it, I think it's appropriate if we ask those questions. Senator Yazinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and this is to a lot of points, and I put my name on earlier when I was listening to Senator Johnson talk about the 3rd precinct and the 5th precinct and show of force.
Stay on topic, Senator Yazinski.
Say that again, Senator Newman?
Stay on topic.
I will, Senator Newman, thank you. So the response, I went back to the number of response that went out there, soft uniforms or hard uniforms, whatever you call them. Did you and do you believe that we learned that 2 officers, and no matter what year they're in, is a non-sufficient response to what the threat was?
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, Senator Jasinski, I can't say that because it depends on the group, on their intent, and on their history. I've sent 1 to 2 officers down to meet with a group that was going to storm the gates of the state fair. We talked to them and they said, well, we're not going to go into the state fair. We're going to just march by the state fair. Well, that's really different in terms of we don't need to arrest them if all they're going to do is march down Snelling Avenue by the state fair and they're not going to disrupt the state fair. So we didn't need more than 2 people to go and talk to them, and then we needed bike cops to escort them down Snelling Avenue. Much of what we decide to do is a tactical decision based on past history, current knowledge, and what you have in resources. So I'm not saying that 1 person or 2 people going out to engage with this group was the wrong tactical decision. It certainly didn't work to keep the statue from being toppled. We own that. We're not disputing that that we were unable to, for whatever reason, keep that statue from being toppled. We're not dismissing that or shirking our responsibility. That would have been something we would have wanted to do, and our plan would have allowed us to do it other than timing. So I can't tell you that the next time I have a group of people that are going to come to the Capitol, I'm going to send a dozen people out there. I will tell you that we will make the solid tactical decisions based on information so that we don't overreact and we don't underreact. And I think both of those are dangerous, frankly. If you underreact, you can create a situation where you're overwhelmed rather rapidly. And if you overreact, you can tip a group that wasn't planning on doing anything into doing something untoward. So you have to try and find the balance point with that.
Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Commissioner. And then my last point, and I'll end. Lastly, I want to say that I'm very supportive of law enforcement. And when I was mayor, you can ask my police chief and all the police officers in Faribault. I was very supportive. I gave them every tool they needed or tried to that we could economically do. They wanted more officers. We couldn't do that. But what I hear from my constituents, they're frustrated, is what happened in Minneapolis was the lack of response of law enforcement that created something that happened across the whole nation that escalated because it wasn't stopped at the time. And they were very frustrated about that, and I'm very frustrated about it. So showing numbers of force to help stop that, I proved that in the 5th precinct versus the 3rd precinct, that if you show a number, that it can stop things, and if it let gone uncontrolled, it will escalate. Thank you.
Senator Ralph, do you have a question with regard to Capitol security or the events of June 10th?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I've got some specifics for Commissioner Harrington. I'm sorry, I actually thought we were following a different order, and I would have inserted my comments much earlier than this, but I'm going to try and circle back and regain where we were. First of all, I do want to make a general statement about Colonel Langer and his presentation and Commissioner Harrington and his presentation. I'm very proud of our enforcement people. I'm very proud of the state troopers. I'm very proud of the police departments and the things that they are able to do. I'm also very cognizant of the idea that you never are able to have an absolutely precise surgical response to a tactical situation unless you have been there before and had the exact same situation. So I do appreciate the probability that you will either overshoot or undershoot. My comment to that is, however, that I have never seen a situation that has really been damaged by a little bit of an overshoot. Not an overreaction, but an overshoot. When you undershoot, you invite disaster. And I guess that's just one thought that I would inject into this. I guess, as I said, I've been very pleased with the professionalism of our forces and of especially the Capitol security. The response a couple of weeks ago to a potential breach was perfect. I do want to talk about a little bit of the security measures that were taken. Do you recall exactly when the fence around the Capitol was erected? I think it was around the end of May, but do you have a more specific date on that?
Commissioner Chair, Senator Ralph, I do not have a specific date. I can certainly get that for you because we would have asked the Department of Admin to put the fence up.
All right. That date is not particularly critical. It's my understanding that it went up pretty quickly and that it formed more of a symbolic barrier than anything. I mean, it's more of this is a place where we can say, if you go beyond this, there's going to be stricter, severe measures taken. If you respect the barrier, then your activities are going to be permitted. Specifically, was there any consideration as soon as you had a credible, let me back up first. Was that fence put up as a result of a credible threat to the Capitol, or was it just thought that this was a good idea?
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, Senator Ralph, I believe it was put up as an actual deterrent because there was a credible threat.
Okay. So then turning to the credible threat that we had at least as early as about 11:30, now you may not have become aware of it till later, but we had a credible threat and about 5 or 6 hours within which to react. Was there any consideration of simply moving the fence and not having to police between the crowd and the statue?
Commissioner Harrington.
Mr. Chair, Senator Ralph, I don't believe that was ever discussed. It certainly was not discussed with me.
All right.
Senator Ralph.
The reason I ask this is, and again, I'm trying to avoid being critical because I think we get caught in the tyranny of the moment, and sometimes we have bad intel and we have to adapt to it. What I'm saying is that when we are looking at responses to credible threats, we need to take a very broad view of that. And so I guess my comment and question is in the future, and again, I hesitate to say this because it sounds like criticism, but it's more advice that soft, hard, this, that, I think it has to be in all of the above. And I guess I just wonder if there's been any additional discussion in the debriefs as to what else could have been done and how it could have been done.
Commissioner Harrington.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ralph, in particular to the statute, no, there has not been specific ideas there. In terms of the Capitol security itself, we've begun to have those kind of conversations about how do you secure the Capitol, what would be the other options that you should be looking at. And it's not just us, it is St. Paul and Minneapolis and other municipal police departments and other municipal departments who've all had to start thinking about that. In very similar ways. The attack on the 3rd Precinct was something that we did not expect to see, and then once it happened, it became part of the new normal. And now I have precincts in districts in multiple cities that have decided they had to secure themselves. I have courthouses that had firebombs thrown in them, and because of that, they have had to take on a different security posture. Whether that posture is forever or whether it's simply during the period of civil unrest that we're currently still in, I don't have an answer to that. But I do actually, I appreciate actually, and I don't think it's being critical, I think it's just being realistic. After any incident, you are foolish if you do not look back over your shoulder and assess what you did right and what you did wrong and what you could do better. And if you're a learning organization, and I will tell you that the State Patrol, and I believe as the organization that I lead at DPS, we're a learning organization. We are constantly open to criticism and counsel and advice because we recognize that we don't have all the answers. Many of us have got, many, many years in this business, and that still doesn't mean we have all the answers. We see things through a lens of this is how we've always done it, and maybe a few degrees on either side of that. And so part of why I come here today is get your vision of what does that look like? Because there are a lot of options as to how you could secure a Capitol. If we look at other major capitals in the United States, we see big fences that are permanently erected. We see armed guards. We see drones and other protective devices around them. That has not been the flavor that I've had from any of the conversations with members of the House or the Senate as to what they wanted to see for the Minnesota State Capitol. They have oftentimes, I've been reminded that this is the people's house and that they want people to feel like they can come in and out of the people's house without feeling like they're coming into an armed encampment. So I really do appreciate the input. I would love to continue the conversation because if you have other ideas as to what you would like to see us do, we will absolutely incorporate that into our discussions as we continue to think about how do we keep you, the visitors, and all of the other millions of people that come through the Capitol complex safe, because that is absolutely a fundamental duty of the Department of Public Safety.
Mr. Chair, thank you. To that point, I think it is important that we also stress, as you said, that these statues, these buildings, the physical, those are also the people's. Those are the taxpayers. Those are the people that should be able to enjoy them safely. And I agree with you that it is important to do that. I think that the point I'm making is that we have to do this with a broad vision. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Ingebretson, you were the last senator I have on my list. Do you have a question with respect to Capitol security or the events of June 10th?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I do.
Senator Ingebretson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Many of your questions have been answered, Senator, so I'm not, Senator, Chief. No, wait a minute, Commissioner, I got you all squared up.
I only have one.
Known you for a long time.
So.
Yeah, we've known each other for a long time. And those last comments you came up, that you just said I really appreciate that you're concerned about the public safety, period, in this Capitol, and as you well should be, and that's I think your biggest charge. And you and I come from the same era where we never used to have these handy devices that we can communicate with, and we can do things back and forth, and there's all kinds of different apps out there that are being utilized now to notify people of things, of events, and a friend told me from a friend, okay, and I'm just going to bring this up, and it can be something we could do on the sidebar, with regards to security, is that I know that you know the well, I assume that you know that the anarchists are very organized. And I'm not saying this was anything to do with this particular incident, but if it was, do you know of an app that actually goes to and gives a message to a group of people and poof, it disappears? There's no clouds, there's no nothing. I do know what that app is. I've got it written down someplace, but have you looked into that at all with regards to the investigation? Or do you know that Drew Evans may have done that at all with regards to somebody being notified that, hey, the troops are coming or whatever, anything like that?
Mr. Chair, Senator Ingebrigtsen, we were and continue to be concerned about the methods of communication by anarchists or other criminal groups that are doing criminal activity. And we did and have tried to determine through the BCA's Fusion Center and through the FBI's Intel section if we can find a way to legally intercept communications that would be indicative of that. So we have explored that. If you asked Commissioner Tomes, apps are, they come and go on a daily basis. I think you're talking about Snapchat, but I'm not positive. Because I know there are apps where you can send a message and it just disappears and it's very difficult to trace. And trying to be able to intercept communications is both a technological issue, but it's also a legal issue in terms of we need to make sure that we're operating within the law, that we cannot be doing illegal wiretaps or other illegal activity, even if it's in the interest of justice.
Mr. Chair, I'll follow up with him with that app. I have it someplace. Thanks.
Be happy to.
Thank you, Senator. That takes care of our list of members who have asked to ask questions. Commissioner, thank you very much for coming in today. I happen to believe that capital security is really, really an important topic for discussion. And apropos, given the events of what happened here at our Capitol recently. So I just want to thank you for coming in. Members, I will do my best to keep you advised as to the upcoming hearings, although recognize that there is a rumor circulating that we're going to be pulled into special session, and that may change our plans, but I'll do the best that I can in keeping you up to date. With that, we are adjourned.